Last week, I spent a lot of time discussing how important investing in yourself is. We discussed figuring out what your needs are and discovering what's really important to you and getting clear on exactly what you want. Hopefully, I convinced you that you really should be your number one priority. And if not, just hang in there because I spent a lot of time resisting this myself. I absolutely positively believed that there were a million things that were more important than me and that focusing on myself was really kind of selfish. I also really believed that it was impossible to put myself first. So, how do you really pick what to prioritize? We're going to talk about that today. And we're going to delve in a little bit deeper because eventually we're going to get into the individual components of our life. And you want to be able to identify which one of those you need to prioritize first. So, before we do, we're going to jump into figuring out exactly how you know what you need to prioritize. Are you ready to shift your mindset and tap into the opportunities that are waiting for you right now? Let's go. Welcome to the Creating Clarity podcast, where we talk all about clearing the fog, shifting our focus, and uncovering the opportunities that are hidden right in front of us. I'm your host, Dr. Liz Aguirre. Before I begin, I must emphasize that this work is separate from my professional medical work and does not represent medical advice or opinions of any specific organization. Rock bottom for me happened at the end of 2018. This was well before the pandemic and well before we started hearing all about burnout across multiple industries, not just the medical community, but many industries are having employees that are experiencing burnout. And we're seeing the great resignation across our nation for multiple reasons. But all that to say, my rock bottom came well before the pandemic. So, what did I do at that time? Well, I realized that I did not have my priorities right, but I just didn't know what to do. I was so tired and I was working my hardest. I was giving it my all, everything I had, and I was getting nowhere. And I felt like everything I did was just falling flat. I I just couldn't win. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, I could not win. The fact of the matter is, I did not have my priorities straight and I didn't know what I even wanted. I just knew I was tired and exhausted and I couldn't keep going the way I was going. So, interestingly enough, I do not know how I stumbled upon it, but I stumbled upon an ad for Tony Robbins' Unleash the Power Within conference. And I remember hearing him talk and thinking, he gets it. Like he understands how I feel. And I remember feeling so emotional. And it even brings up those emotions right now. Like right now, as I'm talking, I'm kind of feeling tearful. And I'm thinking back and I'm remembering just how much I was hurting at that time. And I had no clue how to fix it. So when I saw this little ad for Tony advertising the UPW conference, I thought, I need to go to that. And I had never done anything like that before. Hearing me now, you might think, oh, like she has it all together and she has it figured out. And wow, her mindset is exactly where I want to be one day. I want to be able to see that and think that and feel that. But the truth is, I definitely was not like this at the end of 2018. And it really took a lot of intense work that started with me attending that Tony Robbins conference. So after I saw that, I was talking to my husband. I said, have you ever heard of Tony Robbins? And if you've heard me talk about my husband before, you know that he is decades ahead of me in the mindset. So he looked at me like I had two heads and he said, of course I have. And he's like, who doesn't know who Tony Robbins is? And I was like, well, I didn't. And then he reminded me that there was a CD in our car back when we had a car with CDs. And he said, remember, my sister gave us that CD and it says Anthony Robbins. That's Tony Robbins. And I was like, well, I had never bothered to listen to that because to me, that was all woo woo. And that was just stuff I did not have time for. In that moment in 2018, I really had hit rock bottom and I felt like he was speaking to me. So I told my husband, man, I want to go to that one day. I want to go to that conference one day. And he said, well, when is it? And it was at the end of 2018. It was in November. And he said, well, you should go to it. And I was like, there's no way. There's no way. How am I ever going to find the time to do that? And at that time, I was working as a hospitalist. I was working 1 week on, 1 week off. And for many of you who are not physicians, that 1 week off might sound like a lot of time off, but it's not, because it's spent catching up with notes, catching up with chores, making it to appointments, spending time with your kids. And you quickly feel that with all the to dos that have piled up while you were working the 12-hour days prior to that. So, yeah, I just didn't see it. I thought there was no way that I was going to be able to go to this conference. But my husband was like, I really think you need this and I think you should. And so I said, okay, I'll think about it. And then he circled back with me a week later and he said, well, what do you think? Are you going to go? And I was like, well, I can't really do it because that's my work week. And he's like, people trade all the time. Try to trade. And so long story short, I traded. I went to this conference and it was life changing. My life changed and it has never been the same. The interesting thing is, I learned a lot of the things that my husband has always talked to me about and always preached to me about, and the things that I would roll my eyes about. And he just said it in a way, or he had some guest speakers there that said it in a way that just clicked for me. So, if sometimes you hear me being repetitive in my podcast and you hear me saying some of the same things over and over again, there's a reason. And it's because I know I spent years and years and years refusing to hear these ideas that my husband was offering me. And then one day they clicked when I heard it a slightly different way. So, that's why I spend a lot of time kind of saying things again in a different way, because it does help. And one day, just one little word will change everything. So I came back from that conference and I immediately decided that I was going to change my life and it would never be the same. Kind of like when I grew up in poverty and I left and I went to college and I decided I will never be poor again. Well, the same thing happened after that conference. I decided I will never live this life again. I am never going to do this to myself. So, last week we talked a lot about prioritizing yourself and saying me first. The problem is, if you're like me, you are really resisting it. Your mind is resisting it because for so long you have put yourself last. And maybe you haven't put yourself completely last. Maybe you've managed to get some exercise in here or there. Maybe you've managed to get that time with your kids that you really want, that's important to you. But the question is, are you really taking care of you and your core needs? And all of us define our core needs differently, but I discovered mine at the Tony Robbins conference. And the reason I discovered it is because did this little exercise with us called the Wheel of Life. So I encourage you to just Google the Wheel of Life, specifically Tony Robbins, because there's many, many different wheels of life, and you'll see them in a lot of different coaching websites and so forth. But the Wheel of Life, honestly, it can be broken up very different ways, but it's kind of like a circle with little pie slices. And each one of those pie slices has a category written on it. Now, Tony believes that there's some core fundamental components to that wheel, those kind of being your health and well being, family, fun. Like having fun literally has a slice of the pie all to itself. I definitely had 0% of my pie designated to fun. But fun, finances, emotion, growth, personal contribution, and career. So I typically do go back and review this wheel of life. And honestly, I change it a little bit because I might add another sliver, another slice to the pie. Because, like, if we bunch career into one slice, it doesn't make sense for me because honestly, I have my regular W-2 job that is my career, but I also have an alternate little piece of that. And that's the things that I do right here each week with you. My podcasting, the newsletters I send out to my email list every week. By the way, if you're not on my email list, go to lizaguirremd.com/newsletter and you can sign up for it. But my podcast and my emails that I send every single week, to me, that is part of my career. And the reason is this is my way of giving back. And when I speak on stage, when I speak at conferences, yes, I get paid for that. And this is part of my career because I'm passionate about that. And I feel that that gives me a feeling of personal contribution and growth. And why does it give me growth? Because I'm constantly working on myself and improving myself and seeing things in a different way. And that allows me to grow and share that with all of you. So, all of that to say, I encourage you to go look for this wheel of life. And if the pie pieces aren't labeled exactly as you would label them, feel free to change them. Another example would be family. Honestly, it's family slash relationships. And for me, I have to separate those out because I have my family, I have my friendships, and then I have my relationship with my husband, which is a piece of the pie all in itself. If I lump those all together, then I might score myself differently. So at some point, I'm going to make a modified version of this as I use it so that I can share with you. And again, if you're in my email list, you will get that. But all that to say, I use this as a tool to figure out where I was with my priorities and what I needed to change. And so here's how it works. It has like 10 little rings on it. So for each one of those categories, you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. So with my career, how happy am I on a scale of 1 to 10? With my relationships, specifically with my husband, how happy am I with that in a scale of 1 to 10? My relationships with my friends, my relationships with my family. How about finances? That's really important. It can be a huge source of stress if you don't have your finances set. So, all of those little things, you rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. Then you connect the dots and then you shade inside the number. So, if you ranked it a 7 and you connect it to a 5, then that line between the 7 and 5 and down, you're going to shade it all in. So, before long, you're going to have your wheel colored in. And if you're like me, yours is going to look completely lopsided. Or if you have evolved, which I have now, mine's a little bit more symmetric, but I find that it frequently gets lopsided. And that happens because our needs change. Our priorities then have to change as well. But this tool is really, really helpful. So, for those of you who have asked me, how do I figure out where I need to put my attention? Where do I need to put my focus? When all of these things are important to me, I think that this tool is very, very effective and very helpful. Because guess what? There's only one of you, and there's a lot of things around you that you want to work on, that you want to be a part of. But the reality is, you cannot focus on all of them at once. So, when I feel that I'm getting a little off balance, I'll do the wheel of life again. And then I'll see where am I feeling not as happy? And then that's where I prioritize and that's where I put my energy. So, for instance, I have been putting a lot of time into my business and my work and spending time with my kids. And I had not been doing that for my own health and exercising. And honestly, I was perfectly fine. I knew I was gaining weight. I was totally fine with it until I wasn't. Then I found myself 35 pounds heavier. By the way, I got up to 40 pounds heavier. And I really started to feel it in my health. I started to have my headaches a little more frequently. I started to feel more sluggish. I didn't want to get up in the morning. I didn't have energy in the evening. I wasn't sleeping as well. All the things that we're going to talk about in this season of the podcast, I can tell you I have struggled with personally. And that's why I'm bringing them to light and sharing my experiences with you. But when I did the Wheel of Life, it allowed me to see where I needed to focus my efforts. So, Actually, I just went through this week, and I shifted again. And I went through this 2 weeks ago and I shifted again. So right now, my focus is a little different. I'm focusing on making sure I'm getting the sleep I need, and I'm focusing on the food that I'm putting in my body, and also making sure that I am moving and active every single day for at least 30 minutes. And right now, those are my priorities. Now, does that mean that I'm neglecting my family, neglecting my husband, neglecting my finances? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It just means that those are doing a little bit better right now. They're doing a little bit better. They don't need as much of my attention. And so it's okay to shift and prioritize the things that need a little bit more attention right now. So, if I haven't convinced you about why you need to prioritize yourself first, let me tell you, when I hit rock bottom in 2018, that was only the second time I was experiencing burnout. I went through burnout again after that. And when I was going through it, I realized that I was working harder and harder and harder, but I was not getting ahead. I was not getting things done. And even though I was putting in, 5 more hours of work than I had been, it seemed like the work was just growing and growing. And in reality, I just was not as effective at the work. It was taking me longer to accomplish because I was so tired and I was neglecting myself so much. When you have a migraine, it is so bad. And for you to push through and try to finish your work, which I've done multiple times, like it is literally like a sharp ice pick through your eye at sometimes, or mine were. Everybody's are different, but that's how mine were. So, in fact, just this week, I started having some problems with migraines, and I ordinarily would have pushed through. The old me would have, but this time I was like, I absolutely need to lay down and take some time to myself. And I did. And then I eventually had to go to my boss and say, I need to take a sick day because I just feel awful. And so it was a 3-day migraine, and it took me 2 full days to recover once I allowed myself the time. And that did involve going to the doctor and being evaluated and so forth. But sometimes you need to create that space for yourself, because when you come out recharged on the other end, things flow so much easier and it no longer is as hard. You're doing the same things, but it's just not as hard because you've allowed yourself that space to re energize, recuperate, and rest. So, if you find yourself getting through the day and feeling like, man, I just cannot catch up, then maybe the answer is do less to achieve more. Now, this is incredibly challenging when you have young children, or even when you have teenagers that are very needy. They want to either see more of you, or you're running them around from one activity to the next, or you want to attend their sporting events, or there is always something to do, especially when it comes to kids. But here is how I have come full circle to think about it. I don't want my kids to remember me as agitated and frustrated and getting angry. And that's how I was when I was so exhausted and overworked. And instead, I realized after that conference that I really needed to give myself time to rest and recharge for me to be the best mom I can be. I wanted them to have a mom that was able to play with them and have fun and use her imagination and do silly things. And I was never the silly mom. And sometimes it still doesn't come very easily, but now I'm able to at least come to that place where I can be present with them, and that's because now I'm in a better place for myself physically and mentally. But you can't be playful when you're exhausted, and you can't be present when you have a million things on your list. So you kind of have to deprioritize some of those. Now, the other thing is, I really thought about the fact that I have always had an extremely loving and understanding husband. And he has really supported me through all that time. He recognized how hard I was working. He never was agitated with me when I was frustrated, because he could see how hard I was working. And all he did was wanted to help me. And he was just, his frustration was not knowing how to help me. And I would always tell him, you can't fix this for me. I have to figure it out myself. And no matter how many times he told me I wasn't stuck or I didn't have to do it or I always had a choice, I didn't believe him. And it wasn't until I went to this conference that I really started to believe because I just heard it subtly different. And so that enabled me to have so much more love for my husband. Not that I didn't already, because I absolutely did. I know how much he's done for our family. And when our girls were 1 year old, they're 10 now. My husband became a full-time stay-at-home dad. And that made my job so much easier because he took care of everything at home. And I didn't have to worry about all of that. But what I realized also is I needed to give him my focused time and attention. Why? One, I didn't want to be divorced. And two, I didn't want my kids to come from a divorced family. I know that's challenging. So many people go through divorce. And I don't know that I have the answers for that. Actually, I can tell you, I do not have the answers for that. And we're going to have a segment on relationships later on in this season. But I can tell you, this has always been a challenge for me because I never saw divorce as an option. And I didn't believe in it until people that were close to me, very close friends and loved ones, went through divorce. And I could see how sometimes that just had to be. And so I have no judgment on that at all, but I do have a deeper understanding of how easily it can happen. And when my mind was more clear, I could see that I could be a much, much better wife than I was being. And allowing myself that space to recover and rest enabled me to really see how I can be a better wife just by taking better care of myself. So that was a big eye opening thing for me. And work, the last thing I'm going to talk about today is work. Your work will always be there, it really will. Jobs are like a dime a dozen almost in every industry now. The jobs will be there. And I have to say this, our culture in almost every industry has to change. The great resignation is here. Upping the pay is no longer enough. People want to live a life without constant stress and with the ability to take care of themselves. So, if our careers are demanding so much of us that we can't even get adequate sleep and we can't eat, then something is not right. With that said, I lived that way for years and I blamed it on my job, only to come full circle and realize, whoa, the opportunity was there. I could have taken lunch breaks. I could have worked less hours. I could have done things differently, but I was so tired and so exhausted that I couldn't see that. And so I just kept working harder and harder, and it was not working. So, our minds have been kind of hardwired because we've lived so long trying to get ahead, trying to be successful, trying to do all of these things. And when we do that, it's so hard to see that our self neglect is actually holding us back and preventing us from moving forward. So, I think as we think about our jobs, we need to realize that for us to have the ability to work long term in our careers, we need to address burnout. And our own personal burnout sometimes comes because we do not feel like we have a choice. And the reality is, we always have a choice. Now, I also think that almost in every industry, we're going to have to learn to be more flexible with our employees and our staff, and understanding that they are human and they have human needs, and things happen in life that require work flexibility. And so the days I think of, your loved one passing away and you having to finish the shift, that no longer makes sense. Honestly, it never made sense. But we have just kind of grown up in this culture. And I think the younger generation has a very different idea about this. They are like, nah, I'm not doing that. And I can see why. But for whatever reason, or for reasons I do know, I really thought that I had no choice and I had to work hard. And so now I know better. So I'm going to end this podcast by just asking you again to take a moment to try to figure out where your priorities are. Take a look at the wheel of life, do that exercise, see if you find that helpful. And if you're kind of stuck, not knowing, like, really, should I be prioritizing this? This seems kind of selfish, or this seems like you would not be thinking about it if you did not deep inside feel that it was really important and that you needed it. And then I also want to challenge you. Last week, I spoke about, imagining how your life would be in that particular area if you did not change things. So, as you do the wheel of life, look and see what you rated the lowest. And let's say that you have a challenging relationship with a teenage child. Well, if you allow things to keep going the way they are, how can you see that shaping out? What is that gonna look like? Is that child gonna become estranged? Or if you say, "Okay, I'm gonna focus my efforts, I'm gonna figure this out, and I'm gonna put the time and attention into this relationship with my teenager," and they're probably gonna resist it at first. They might even be confused because I've never done this, but I am committed to working and improving this particular area of my life. So this might help you, and I hope it does. And we're going to move into these individual components where we could and should and might and want to prioritize. One of the first things that I am going to be talking about is sleep. And the next episode, we're going to dig into that because I did not realize how much sleep by itself was impacting me and how just getting more sleep changed a lot for me. So I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please share this episode with a friend. And again, if you have not joined my email list, please do, because we know that to make a shift in our mindset, it really does take constant reminder. Like I said, I work on my mindset every single day. So if you want just a little dose of mindset work, you can sign up for my email. I send my emails on Monday, followed by my podcast on Wednesday. And that's two opportunities to start thinking about things maybe a little bit differently and hearing a different perspective. So thanks so much for joining me today, and I will see y'all next week. Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit subscribe so that you won't miss the next episode. And if you like this episode, please share it with a friend and give me a 5-star review so that I can reach more people. I'll see you next week.
Disclaimer: the views and opinions shared here are for information and educational purposes only. They do not serve as a medical or professional advice. They do not represent any academic, medical, or professional institution or organization. If you found this helpful, don't forget to leave a 5-star review.
Thank you.